Hey there, Magic in the Room listeners. Before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to let you know about an opportunity to get a Magic in the Room hat. Yes, you heard me correctly, a free Magic in the Room hat. Well, it's not really free. You have to do a survey first. Go to magicintheroom.com. We have a survey there. Should just take a few minutes. We are looking for information from you about what you like about the podcast, what you wish we would do differently, and would just love to hear any other ideas that you have. So again, magicintheroom.com. Give us some information and feedback. We will mail you a hat. It's going to be awesome. And let's get to today's episode.
Magic is found in every room where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah, and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset, and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello, I'm Chris Province, and welcome to the Magic in the Room podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode. We are going to be joined by my friend, master storyteller, educator, organizational designer, and all things friends and business, Mr. David Hutchens. David, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here with you.
Oh man, it's awesome. I just, we've known each other for a bit now, and just happy to have you on our podcast to explore the idea of storytelling. What a rich concept to build a career around and be passionate about helping others with. But as tradition on Magic in the Room, we always start with a question of the day. And David, I know you're a family guy. And so my question for us today is, what is your favorite family activity?
Okay. So my kids are a little older. My daughter's 24 and my son is, she's 23 and my son's 20. Favorite family activity. So we can file this one under the gifts of COVID, because as we're recording this, we're just coming out of the crazy COVID year, right? And one thing that COVID did for us is it kind of drove our family out onto the back porch of our house. You know, when we weren't going anywhere, we're not going out to eat, we're not going to movies. So the back porch became our evening routine. And I've got a smoker out there. You know, we've got ribs smoking, and we watch the sun go down behind the trees, and then would watch the bats come out, and bats are flying over our heads. And we would just sit there and just talk as it got dark, and would talk about career or how we're feeling stuck or what we're hoping for. And it became this really beautiful experience with my family. Now that we're coming out of COVID, we're still doing it. We're still going out onto the back porch just so we can be together and talk about things that matter.
That's awesome. Talking about things that matter. And that's what a great way to connect. And then I gotta ask, what's the rig? What kind of smoker rig you got out there?
It's a Kamado style smoker. So have you seen those? It's like thick ceramic, and you just put hardwood lump wood in there, and there's no dials, there's no gas. It's just oxygen, wood, and heat. And it makes the best smoked chicken and steaks and ribs. It's better than a restaurant.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The Kamado style smoker's definitely my favorite for chicken. That's what we definitely rock the chicken on there. In fact, I think I might have to do that tonight now that you mentioned it.
Oh, you have one?
Yes. Yeah, I've got the green egg.
All right, we've got the Kamado Joe. Oh, this is already the best podcast ever. Let's just talk about smoked meat.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I've got a hasty bake. The Rec Tech arrived yesterday, so I just love it, man. And I think that's the whole thing. There's something different about the whole barbecue thing, because you do get to put the food on and you kind of gather around that space all day or for an extended time, and you get to connect, and finally the food comes off, and then you get to enjoy the fellowship over dinner. And I just like, I love barbecue for that reason.
I love the fact that on that cooker, it can take 45 minutes to get it up to the correct temperature. So if you're in a hurry, Kamado is not the way to go. But like you said, you commune, right? You're watching the flame and taking your time and sipping a beer and just talking. So it slows you down.
Yeah. Yeah. And just valuing those moments. That's awesome. And thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, it's, it's kind of crazy, our family activities, we've got a span of children that go from, 14, 6, and 2. So like it's a lot of years to cover, but, like you, I think it's just, just spending that time together, activities where we can do that, just going on a walk around the neighborhood, you know, being able to, I don't know, hold hands with the little one while the older two ride their bikes, or, just hang out at the pool. That's something, that we get to do together. And I can throw the littlest one for a while, then I got to throw the middle one for a while, and I can't throw the 14-year-old anymore. So, I've got to cherish all those moments. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just so, and I especially like coming out of a period where the oldest one was playing competitive sports. Like, we were at the ballpark every weekend, and like the hours just really weren't there. I mean, we worked and went to school during the week, and you do the normal weekly things: dinner, baths, bed. Yeah, but since the oldest one, he's just like doing lessons and playing school ball, and that's really changed our available time. So what I'm really valuing now is, when the weather is nice and we have, weekends during the more active part of the year, like we're getting to spend them together. So I have a lot of gratitude about that. So looking forward to this summer.
Yeah, experiences, not things, right? One thing I like about my kids getting older is I like Christmas better now that we're not buying mounds of crap that go into the toy closet, and now we're spending money on experiences. And I wish I'd kind of gotten this idea earlier.
Yeah. I mean, what's more fun than spending, a week purging your home of crap only to backfill it with more crap?
That's right. No, we played that game for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still in that phase. But, like you, we do really try to focus on, what's something that we can do, and how do we, maybe spend our resources on activities versus things. Good advice. Boy, storytelling. Let's start scratching the surface on this.
Well, we're already doing it, right?
Oh, right. So there I was on the back porch.
Yep.
Trying to smoke a rack of ribs, but it was 20 degrees that day.
When suddenly.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about like why storytelling for you. And I think, I'm always enamored by your start and kind of this trajectory that's arrived you to where you are. But why storytelling? I mean, there's 100 disciplines out there. What called you to this?
There was a moment in my career when I noticed that story was the common element to all of the work that I was doing, because I started my career as an advertising guy. So I used to write TV commercials and radio commercials at big advertising agencies. And so, that's stories, right? Marketers have known about this for a while now, that, if you tell stories, I learned early, people will buy more Coca-Cola. And then I left the ad business because I was tired of writing about hamburgers all the time. And I knew I wanted to write about teams and innovation and leadership. And so I left the ad business. And now I write about those things. And I tell my clients, I still kind of think of myself as an ad guy, but instead of moving consumer products, now I help ideas move through organizations and systems, using a lot of the same ideas of authenticity, story, humanity, emotion. All of these things belong in our leadership, and it makes us better as leaders.
Yeah, I think that's an important takeaway, what you hit on there. I help ideas move through organizations. And like, we can have really intentional communications frameworks, but if we're not able to tell the story, the message gets lost, or it lacks an emotional content that really we as humans use to make decisions. And I'd love for you, let's talk about the story of Phineas Gage for a minute. Like when we talk about emotional content being required to make decisions, share with us and share back with me and our listeners kind of what that story is.
Oh, that's a great old case study. Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage was a young worker leader on the U.S. Railroad, and he led teams that was helping to lay tracks across the United States. And Phineas Gage's job was to help put in the dynamite and the explosives to blow out the rocks so that you could lay the tracks down. And so they do that by, they have this big piece of steel that looks like a spear that they use to like poke a hole down in the rocks, and then they put gunpowder down in there, and then they put the packing on top of it. And they use this thing called a tamping iron to press it down. Well, one day Gage must have been distracted because he forgot to put in the packing material. And that tamping iron must have hit the rock because it created a little spark, and it ignited the gunpowder that was in the hole. And that spear became like a rocket. It launched upwards, and scientists and doctors now think he must have had his head turned like this. He must have been looking this way because that spear went up through his jaw, and it went through his head, and it popped his eyeball, and then it came out of the top of his head, and then it shot all the way through his skull, and then landed in the ground like 60 feet away, like a spear. And the thing that was amazing about this was that it didn't kill him. Gage was alive. He was talking to his friends. He had to hold the wounds to keep the blood from coming out. And they put him on a cart with a horse and brought him back into town, and they were able to save his life. And then the fascinating thing was that after that, Gage, people said, was never the same, and that he became combative. His personality changed. He couldn't keep a job. He couldn't keep a relationship. And he became vulgar and unpredictable in social situations. He was never the same after that. And so what's cool about this is we have Gage's skull. It's on display at Harvard Medical School. And so now we can do 3D imaging. We see the hole in the top, and doctors can now create a perfect diagnosis of what happened when that spear went through his head. And what we know now is that it separated the lobes of his brain that are rational thinking and emotional thinking. And so he could still think rational thoughts. He could still feel feelings, but he was no longer able to connect the two. The author who does a great job talking about this is a guy named Antonio Damasio. His book is called Descartes' Error. Descartes' Error, right? Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." We think that our identity comes from our ability to think rational thoughts. And what Damasio is saying is, no, our identity comes from our ability to connect emotion to those thoughts. And when Gage lost the ability to connect emotions to thoughts, he could no longer make decisions. And in fact, what Damasio shows is that we're making decisions emotionally all the time. Our emotion goes first. We think that we're making decisions rationally. We're not. Emotion goes first. We're using our rationality just to justify what we've already imagined emotionally. And so Gage shows what happens when you lose that ability to connect emotion. You can't make any decisions. So it's a fascinating case study.
Yeah, and I think where that ties back to what I think about leaders and organizations, it's if we have that singular belief, that profound belief, that purpose, like we're trying to activate and motivate teams and other leaders and like try to inspire them to action. And story is really that link between what is rational, what are the quantitative things we're trying to make happen, and how we accomplish those things by calling to people's interest and emotions, right?
So right before COVID, I was working with a group where they brought me into their leadership summit, and I was going to be one of the speakers. But I got to listen to the speakers that were before me, and so one of the top senior executives, had the stage before me, and he made his presentation of his, here's the strategy that we're rolling out. But he started his presentation with a personal story. It was a pretty nice story. It had nothing to do with this presentation, but, it was this human moment about, taking his daughter to the emergency room when she had a sports injury. So anyway, someone asked me about how do stories engage people and how do they help retention. And so I took a little bit of a risk, and I said, well, let's think back to Tom's presentation right before mine. I said, I have questions for you in the audience. And I said, when Tom took his daughter to the hospital, what was his daughter's injury? And in unison, the entire crowd goes, torn meniscus. I said, how long did he wait in the emergency room? 4.5 hours. And I said, how much was the bill? And in unison, everyone goes, $6,300. And I said, what was the second point of Tom's strategy roadmap? And it was dead silent. And it was uncomfortable. Nobody could remember. And so the point is the material that you put in the story sticks in your body. So Tom's most important material, people had already forgotten 30 minutes later. The material, the messages that weren't important are going to stick with his audience forever. So my message for everyone listening is, what are the messages that you want to make sure stick with people and they never forget? You should put those messages in a story.
What I'm trying to get everyone to understand today is that idea of decoupling between what is rational data and what are emotional things that will get you to connect to data. Data in itself just isn't very compelling. It's the second bullet point on the strategy slide. Who cares? And that is really the power of storytelling to me, and the influential power of emotion. So when we talk about decoupling, David, like in your words, what is decoupling?
It's what leaders do all day, every day. They come into the office the night before, they're sitting with their families, and they're talking about what happened and what they learned and what it meant. And they don't even know they're doing that. They think they're just talking over the dinner table. No one has to tell them to use this language that's narrative. It's what they do naturally. But then they come into the office and they leave something behind because they start talking like a PowerPoint slide. They start talking in bullet points. They don't slow down to bring in this context and this human data that is emotion and story. And so decoupling is the norm in leadership communication. And it doesn't work. And leaders are increasingly coming to this awareness that, wow, we need to show up differently in this world that's noisy. In this world that's complicated, we're not having the impact that we need to have. And we need to reintegrate who we are, our identities, our emotion, ourselves with the leadership and with the task. So that's what story does.
Yeah. And I think as we've gone through the process of story, I think it's been really interesting of how much you have to know about yourself in order to tell the story. And I think that's what makes it uncomfortable. It's not comfortable work, David, to tell a powerful story, because, you have to go places. You've got to really excavate on, I have to excavate on my beliefs and what I believe to be true and be willing to put those out there to the world. But if we're going to, I guess, show up and tell stories and persuade as our true selves, like, what does that process entail?
It is uncomfortable. Even when the stories aren't particularly personal, there's a noticeably human element that a lot of leaders aren't used to. I still do this at some level too. Even as I was telling the Phineas Gage story, I was kind of critiquing myself. I was going, I hope I'm not overdoing it. I hope this is okay. Oh, I hope people don't think this is weird, right? So there's something about this language, that story. It's like we're opening ourselves up, and we're showing more of who we are. I'm letting you see me when I talk about how I got up on that stage and I challenged that leader, right? So that it feels different. And for a lot of leaders who aren't used to doing this, I do a lot of work internationally as well. European leaders really struggle with this because there's more of a wall between who I am in the organization and who I am back at home. And even in European organizations, that wall is coming down. Even those leaders are saying it's not working anymore. Our teams are demanding that we show up differently. Our markets are demanding that we show up with more humanity and more of ourselves. And that's hard. It's vulnerable. Brene Brown, of course, does a great job talking about vulnerability and how do we bring that into our leadership.
There's this whole idea of like how I view myself and my stories determines a lot about the stories I tell about the world. And therefore, like how I approach every day. So as we've gone through the process, we have these ideas of story circles, right, where we're excavating and sharing stories with one another and things that may move ourselves, our teams, our organizations forward. I think the more people we can pull into our syndicates and start sharing and start talking about ideas, it does become less. It becomes more comfortable the more we do it. So I do think that practice is key, right?
Yeah, I think that practice is key. And then it becomes cultural. The thing that's hard is if nobody else around me on the team is doing this, and if I'm the only one doing it, then I'm more aware that I'm not falling into the cultural norms, that I'm showing up in a different way. But again, many organizations are making an investment in saying we have to show up in this different way.
You spoke about it earlier. It's in order to persuade, we need to tell story. About how much of the time do we need to be telling story versus giving data? Like if we want to be really persuasive as leaders.
That's funny. That question comes up a lot. The way some people ask the question is they'll say, hey, listen, Dave, I love what you're saying about all the story stuff. I get it. I believe it. But, let's be real. It's possible to overdo this stuff, isn't it? And yeah, I think the answer is yeah. It's like any tool in the toolkit. If all you have is a hammer, you want to make every problem the nail. Story isn't always the response, isn't always the answer. I have a hypothesis, Chris, that about 30% of your communication as a leader should be storytelling. And I have a whole process that I've gone through where I've validated that by analyzing effective leadership communications and, crunching some numbers. How much time are they spending in narrative? How much time are they spending in data, in didactic telling, in other kinds of rhetoric? And the most effective communications, and in my new book coming out, I actually show some maps, some heat maps of effective communications. But it seems to validate my 30% hypothesis, which is 30% is a great way to go.
Yeah, and kind of we've, for the listeners out there, our team has all been, working with you and has taken a full-blown sort of delivery from you. And it's just, the thing that always calls out to me is the power of 30%. That's the headline on everything that I have around story. And it's to try to keep that top of mind. Like 30% of the time, I need to be telling story. If I want 9 minutes of attention, I need a 2-minute story. If I want 40 minutes of attention out of a work group, I need to have 3 or 4 stories, and because I'm not going to compel them with data. I've got to show up. I've got to show up as me because that's why they're in the room. So for me to be an effective educator, I have to be intentional about how I show up.
Yeah, the brain is hungry. The brain wants to consume a lot of energy, and we have evolved over the millennia for our brain to push back against thinking, because we want to conserve energy so we can run away from the saber-toothed tiger if we have to, right? And so our brain is looking for ways to turn off. And when we present those PowerPoint decks with 40 slides in them that are loaded with charts and data, your audience is going to start tuning out. They can't retain all of that. But when we tell stories, it's a different engagement. Now our brain, what Daniel Kahneman would call the system one active thinking part of the brain, is able to relax, and then we kind of move down into our body. There's a reason why you'll binge watch Avengers on Netflix on a Saturday, and you'll sit there for 6 hours, right? You won't get tired of it. It feels good. So your audience, if you love your message, if you love your audience, give both of them the gift of story that will move that content into this easier to receive communication.
Well, and based on this, like, it's, I'll kind of tag this with a light bulb. Like, it's no wonder we'd rather watch a movie than sit in a presentation. One is full of story, the things that our brain is super like inspired by and engaged by, and we're all active up here about it. Whereas with the power, if you're just giving me a bunch of data in the PowerPoint, man, just not very compelling. So, I'll use a real life example of, I gave a 50-minute delivery last week. I used 2 slides and 6 bullet points. One slide was an image and one slide was just an infographic. So, that delivery, in the old ways of doing things for me, pre-David Hutchens, would have been, 22 slides in 50 minutes. And, it's just embracing. And I was at an event last night for the people that I delivered that to, and they're like, man, we'd love to have, more speakers like you. And that was so compelling. Thank you so much for being there. And I think all these things are inside all of us, but it's learning how to shape them so that we are persuasive as leaders and we can get gravity to the ideas we want to put out there.
Wow, I love that, Chris. I want to hear the presentation now. That sounds cool.
Well, it's a good thing. You get a good piece of it on the 28th, so we get to talk more then. Yeah, but I love this idea of how we came to know one another. Is I thought, man, this idea of story is such a big part of executing on purpose. So if I have a purpose, if I have an intent or objective, I have to be able to compel people around that idea. And I fully embrace, like, I needed to be a better storyteller. So I grabbed your book, The Circle of the Nine Muses, and it just speaks to, here's some story frameworks, and here's, let me help you understand what story actually is. That's how I took that book in. And the book is incredible. I think all your materials are so, like, just beautiful. Like that book has like the matte laminate. It's got the thicker pages. The illustrations are great. And I'm like, man, this guy's speaking to me. So I didn't know David Hutchens from the Man on the Moon at that point. So I just went on the internet and I looked, the book came recommended to me. And so then I went on the internet and found your website. And lo and behold, like, this guy works with companies. And I'm like, if this guy works with companies, I have to know more about it. Like, maybe he can come in and help me be a better storyteller. And I remember the first day we talked, David, it started out like, hey, what's it look like for, like, is there an opportunity for you to help me be a better storyteller? Then it turned into like, wait, let's help our whole team be better storytellers. And then, we were doing workshops with all 15 of us and you, and I just loved that entire experience. And what that really did, it created common language around story for our team. And for the longest time, like, that skill was really nascent within our team. Like, it's something we had to start focusing on, but that engagement with you, just, it plants the seed and gives the language. So then when we're doing proposals or we're doing pitches, it's like, what role does story play in this delivery? And it moves that top of mind. And I think it makes it more enjoyable and more engaging for everyone involved. But that's really was the start of our relationship, is me buying the book and then saying, I want to know this guy. And you are the type of person that is knowable. So thank you for that. And yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm sharing that so that, other people out there that are listening or watching can just, if you see something that inspires you, like reach out, like reach out to someone, connect with someone. And, especially if they have knowledge and are inspiring to you, you never know what sort of friendship or connection can come from it.
I love that, Chris. Thank you. Wow, that's cool. So I'll tell you. So that's an origin story, right? I'll tell you my side of that origin story, and that is that the moment when I knew that this was interesting and there was a conversation here, honestly, was when I saw the name of your organization, Purpose and Performance. And that's what you started talking about in our first conversation was purpose. And I thought this team is different. They're talking about something really potent here. And, there's that Simon Sinek talk, where he talks about start with why, right? The idea that most leaders do a lot of what storytelling and a lot of how storytelling, but very few ever get to the why. And a lot of people struggle with that. How do we have the why conversation? And this is where story is really rich. Story is why language. Story is purpose language. If you're a purpose guy, you should be in story. If somebody says, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? Your answer is likely to be, well, because. The response to why is because of something that happened. Let me tell you what happened. So story is purpose language.
Absolutely. And, I love this idea. Anytime in our team meetings now, when we start talking about using story, it's always, so there I was trying to do this thing, but this other thing was getting in the way. So we tried something else and we had a breakthrough. And after we found that breakthrough, we achieved. And this is what we achieved. And now we know that when we run into this type of obstacle, if we issue this type of intervention, we can find this kind of success. But I mean, it's like that training with you, David, really helps leaders understand, like, what are these frameworks and how do we take our experiences and our values and shape them into the stories that can help us persuade. And that leads me to my next question. Like, when business leaders are reaching out to you and they're declaring, like, I'm willing to be a better storyteller, but what are some of the things they're trying to accomplish? They're trying to be more this, or they're trying to get their teams to do a thing. When people come to you, what are they looking to get better at?
Yeah, a lot of them are calling not because story is the new fad, the new hot thing, and they want to get in on it. Usually, they're calling because they're hurting. They're in pain. They've been losing. I've been working with the biggest technology consulting company in the world. And they're calling because they're losing in the marketplace. They'll go in to sell to a big client for a piece of business that's $250 million. And the customers are saying increasingly, listen, we already know what you're about to sell us. Because your competitor was in here yesterday making their pitch. And they've got something similar to you. And your other competitor is going to be in here on Wednesday, and they're going to say something similar. So we already know what you're going to say. And what we want to know is who are you? Make us believe in you. And my client at this consulting company, they're geniuses, right? They're geniuses at software and coding and technology solutions, but they're confused by this language. What does that mean? Make you believe? And this is new. They're saying in the past, we always won on solution. We always won on innovation, but now innovation's become commoditized, right? Where if we do come up with something new or something different, our competitor is going to copy it really quickly. So you can't win on innovation anymore. You have to win on people. Make us believe what they don't know how to generate that. And so they're discovering that when they tell stories, it does differentiate them. It does show what's special and different about them. So that's why leaders are calling.
And it's interesting to me because we talk about it a lot on this podcast. It's the idea that we as people will only attract people that believe what we believe. When we do business, we're going to attract customers that believe what we believe. And the power of story is communicating those beliefs to market so people can choose whether or not to align. The power of story is communicating those beliefs to job candidates so that those people can choose how, when, and if to engage. But if we can't tell the story about what we believe, it's very difficult to compete. And that's, we just have to get comfortable with this idea of we're not going to attract customers that don't believe what we believe. We kind of have to let them go, right?
That is such a rich idea, Chris. I'm going to be with that one for a while. We attract people who believe what we believe. That's fantastic.
And I think that's the idea. That's what gives us gravity. That's what gives us gravity as leaders. It's what gives our business gravity. I don't think we could work with someone that doesn't believe in purpose or that sees that path between like how purpose lays the tracks to what their ultimate goal is. That's why we should have hope, right? This isn't a wish. Like this is hope. Like if we follow our purpose, we can achieve these things. But we dang sure better be able to tell a story along the way.
Yeah, Steve Jobs, of course, was one of the masters of this. You know, his followers, his customers camped out on the sidewalk, you know, for a weekend waiting for the next iPhone. And he generated that not by showing them a slide with the technical specs. You know, he told stories that attracted people who believed something. You know, it's fun to go back to that era and look at old Microsoft ads and old Apple ads, because Microsoft ads were full of data. Here's the processing power. Here's what your system's going to need to run the new Windows Vista. Here's a list of capabilities. Steve Jobs showed a picture of John Lennon and said, "Do you want to change the world?"
I must have watched that Think Differently video 14, 15 times by now. But that whole idea of it was Mother Teresa and it was Martin Luther King and it was John Lennon. And it was like, do you want, like these people are heroes and they thought differently. Do you want to be like them? Or do you want to, align with that ad of 14 bullet points?
Yeah.
And I think that when we talk about brands, what a great, I would just, if anyone listening, like go watch that Steve Jobs Think Differently delivery. I think it was from 1984 or something, right? It was a long time ago. But you talk about brands bringing in people and attracting, like people like me buy Apple. That's all they want. People like John Lennon, people like Martin Luther King, people that want to inspire change purchase Apple. That's what he was saying. People that, like the bullet points purchase Microsoft.
You said something really interesting that caught my attention, which is that when people look at that ad, they say, "I want to be like that." And that language kind of caught my attention because it's aspirational, right? I want to see myself as being that kind of person. And I think that if you are a leader, if your role as leader, whether formally or informally, you're pointing to the future. You're saying not only are we going to go do something different, but let's be something different. And so you're calling people into a better story of themselves. And so I love Peter Singe's definition of leadership. He says a leader is someone who has followers. I like that one. Wins for simplicity. I mean, it's more profound the more you think about it. A leader is someone who has followers. Who's following you? Who do you want to follow you? Right? If you didn't have the job title, who would be following you? You should be telling stories that are calling people to a better future with you.
And I 100% agree. I love that definition. And then I say, is it more likely for us to have followers if we know what we believe and can espouse those beliefs and then have the courage to live those beliefs, right? Because it's one thing to know that they're there and it's one thing to tell the story, but then that big courageous step to align everything we do to everything we believe and the stories we tell about what we believe. And that's what I love when you talk about the difference between a spouse story and experience story, because where I take that, David, it's here's the story I tell people about who I am. Here's the story I tell people about the business we are. But then when people experience me as a person or people experience our business, is it everything we've espoused ourselves to be? Is it everything? Are they experiencing me at a discount to my espoused story? Are they experiencing our business at a discount to what we say we are? Or are they experiencing us at a premium? Here's what I say I am. Here's what I say our business is. But then when people experience me or our business, do they go, man, that was even better than I thought? That's remarkable. I want to tell somebody about it. I want to follow that person. I mean, what rings for you around that idea?
Yeah, the espoused story versus the actual story. It, the question of authenticity usually comes up in this story conversation. Does the story need to be true? Does the story need to be authentic? And I think of the espoused story and the live story, as it's like two lenses, and when they're lined up, when the story I'm saying lines up with the story I'm living, the whole time in this conversation, your listeners are kind of checking me out, right? You're sizing me up. Who is this guy? And what is he saying? And does he sound real? And we all have a really sensitive bullcrap meter. And if I'm full of crap, you know it. And if I'm not full of crap, you're thinking, ooh, I like this guy. And I hope it's the second, right? So when the espoused story and the live story line up, we say that person, that story, that organization, that team is authentic. When they don't line up, when what you're saying doesn't match with how I'm experiencing you, the response can be rage. I say, you're manipulating me. You're not for real. And this is why, here in the United States, political discourse is so toxic right now. Story is being swung around like a hammer, and it's not matching what we're seeing, and the result is rage.
Right. That's pretty powerful. That whole idea, especially, I kind of think about anyone that's in the service business or sells a commodity product, which arguably is everyone. We want to espouse stories about customers and team members and people that connect with us being cared and respected. And are we able to deliver that? We love to espouse the story, but are we setting up our systems so that is the actual experience? My systems as a leader, how am I building my own resilience? How am I energizing myself? How am I making sure that I show up to other people the way I say I do, right? Or the way I say I believe. Same thing for businesses. If I'm not recruiting intentionally or developing team members, but I say I care for the customers, do I? Do I care about them if I'm not building and nurturing and stewarding the structures required for customers to have that experience? And it's just a lot of work, right? But that's exactly why we specialize in commodity and service businesses. But it's all, how strong of a differentiator is story, David? At the end of the day, why is it important?
So I told you about the technology consulting firm. Their clients are saying, make us believe in you. And so I went and worked with them over a weekend because they were going in for a presentation for a piece of business. It would have been it's a $250 million contract, $250 million. And the client was saying, show us who you are. And they had the technical solution. They knew how to implement. They knew how to execute. They had a record for doing that. But we spent the weekend finding stories that we could connect to those solutions, not just to show how long the implementation would take and how much it would cost, but to say, when you work with us, you're getting creativity. When you work with us, we will exercise resilience. That's not data. That story that makes that case. They won the account. They said that this, they didn't say that David Hutchens is the reason we won $250,000. That would be a pretty good endorsement quote. But they did say that those stories were instrumental in creating that human connection that our client was looking for. So when people ask me what's the return on investment for story, well, I know one group that'll say it's $250 million, right?
Well, and I think I'd love to talk someday about how we measure the return on connection. Yeah, is there anything else that's why are we in business if we're only transacting? That would be, a challenge that I put to all of us to think about as leaders.
Well, one more thought on that, because I don't want to end the conversation on the reason to tell stories is you win $250 million, because more is happening when we're telling the stories. And I often will have people in the experience as we're doing the work. At the end, there's a moment that often comes where I'll see them pause and take a breath, and they'll say things like, this was profound. And, it's not that the process is profound. It's the experience is profound because a reintegration is happening, a reintegration between our brains and our hearts and our spirits and our identity and who we are. We're reconnecting ourselves to vocation and how we're showing up in the world. And story language does that. It brings the whole person back in. And people say this feels profound, right? So why should we tell stories? Well, do you want to show up with humanity in your vocation? I do. And the story is the language that lets me do that.
Absolutely. And I would just speaking, I would guess maybe it takes 6 or 8 hours to learn how to tell a story, but it is a lifetime of practice to master the skill. And, to have a thinking partner like you around this concept is invaluable. I can speak to the language that our time with you has established for our team. I just think as we look to execute, and again, we know the technicals of communications frameworks, we know how to build those, but us developing the ability to work with other leaders and help them develop the stories of their business or of their intent, it's a multiplier for the ability to be effective. And that's what we continue to find out as we continue to develop our skill in this space. So thank you for that. And that's, if I could give you a more resounding endorsement, I would, but I think I can't say enough good things. And so much so we have some exciting things that, hopefully coming around the corner. But what's something recently that you've completed that you feel really good about, David?
It's funny now that we're coming out of COVID, I feel like I'm having a lot of conversations with friends where we're assessing this crazy experience we were just in, and there's loss. For some people, really significant loss. And there's also gifts that come out of COVID, right? Because, I don't ever want to hear the word pivot again, but we were all forced to do that in our own different ways. And so, for me, when COVID first hit, there's this period where I felt paralyzed for a couple months. I lost all my contracts. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to pivot. And now I've got a whole armload of new offerings. My new book is coming out. It's called Story Dash. I think the subtitle is Find, Develop, and Activate Your Most Valuable Business Stories in Just a Few Hours. In the program I do, it's a day-long program. It's called the Storytelling Leader. I now have, I'm going to hold this up to the camera if you're watching the video podcast. Now, there have always been materials, frameworks, cards, all kinds of resources that help you find, develop, and activate your stories in the program. Now, I'm showing a cool box. This is the participant kit that holds all of those materials together, including this resource called the Story Deck. It's a deck of cards with dozens of ideas of stories you should be telling. All right, Chris has his. This framework called the Story Canvas, which you can use to develop your story visually so you can tell it with impact. And so all of these goodies are inside this box. I posted a picture of the box on Instagram, and I suddenly started getting all these messages saying, can I buy that? Which I love. That was a great response. And the answer is no. You got to go through the program. It's for program participants. You can't buy it otherwise. So that's something new that I've been working on that I'm excited about.
That's awesome. I love that. I love the artifacts. I mean, I think I've got, story decks are huge, like strategically, right? I love using the story deck for strategic planning, because as we look at what are the stories we're going to tell this year, and it allows us to take those inventories of where we've been and what stories might call to market based on the learnings or the experiences of the past year. So love using the story deck for strategic planning. But the beauty, the texture, and the utility of the artifacts you create are unreal. I just am thankful that you do what you do, because it helps us do what we do better. And I think that is with every leader. Think about, and kind of what I challenge all the listeners to today, if you were 5 times better at telling stories, how does that influence your ability to lead? And that's what made me knowing David Hutchens a no-brainer. And I hope that everyone else that's listening out there can reach out and get to know David Hutchens as well. David, give us a rundown. Where can we get your stuff? How do we get a hold of you?
Online, two websites. The program is simply called storytellingleader.com, storytellingleader.com, or my website, davidhutchens.com. And both websites will point you to each other. Hutchens, of course, is spelled with a Hutchens, not an INS, which is how everybody wants to spell it. davidhutchens.com. Come find me. Let's talk.
Awesome. And if you want to talk to us here at Purpose and Performance Group about our experience with David, or you want to look at your purpose as an organization or as a leader and, excavate what are some stories that you can tell that will move your effectiveness forward or move the effectiveness of your organization forward. We can help with all of that. So you can reach out to us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, find us on any of our social channels, but most importantly, thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you, David, for the time. I appreciate you so much, but more importantly, I appreciate our friendship and your leadership in this space. So thank you, and look forward to having you on again sometime.
You and I have many more stories to come.
That's right. Thank you, David. Okay, that's it for this week. Talk soon, everybody.
Hey everybody, Luke here again. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Just wanted to remind you again that there's an opportunity for you to get a free Magic in the Room hat if you go to magicintheroom.com and complete a survey to help us make this podcast better for you. That's what we want to do. So go and enter some information, including your address, and we will send you that hat, and are really excited to hear what feedback you have for us. Hope that you have a great day and that you can go out there as a courageous leader and make some magic in your own rooms that you're a part of. We'll talk to you later.